Well, hello, everyone. I'm Tyler Chrestman, and welcome to the Chrestman Conversation. I want to start off the podcast today by wishing a happy gender non-exclusive birthday to all of the uterus carriers out there. Or for any of the sane people watching, I want to wish you a happy Mother's Day. Did anyone out there happen to catch Cori Bush's testimony this week before Congress? Cori Bush, my representative from down here in the city of St. Louis, she gave a testimony earlier this week at a meeting about black maternal health, which was looking at healthcare disparities between white and black. And she used a phrase that started a lot of controversy online. She said, quote, "Every day, black birthing people and our babies die because our doctors don't believe our pain. My children almost became a statistic. I almost became a statistic." End quote. Now let's ignore for 1 second the merit of her statement, whether or not it has any, and we can debate on that in a moment. I want to just focus on this term that she used, black birthing people, and this push for gender inclusive language. Let's just start off with what should be obvious. The term black birthing people is ridiculous. Honestly, it sounds like something a white supremacist would reduce a black woman to. Talk about them as a vessel for black birth. It sounds racist. It's weird. Cori Bush, the most anti-racist person in Congress, is using a term that kind of sounds like something a racist would say. It also just is ridiculous on its face. They're black birthing people as opposed to black mothers. There's a difference between trans people and trans activists who claim to speak for trans people. Most of the trans people I have met in my life, and I think this probably would go for most of the trans people in the world, when they transition from male to female, they understand the fact that they're not going to birth children. Most men who transition to women enjoy being called woman. That's why they're transitioning from a man to a woman. They're not transitioning to nothing. They're transitioning to a woman. And they're not offended by the word. Trans activists act like trans people are offended by the words man and woman. They talk about uterus carriers or birthing people as though a trans person is going to be offended by the word woman. They're not. They aren't. It's ridiculous that they would be. And even if they are, why then are we changing the entire language for a tiny fragment of the population? Again, I think most trans people just don't care. The people who purport to speak for the trans community, they care, but they don't really speak for the trans community because the trans community is not a monolith like everyone else. The trans community is very tiny in this country. It's a very tiny percentage of the population. And they don't all think alike. I had a friend, I'm not going to name names, but I have a friend who is trans, someone who used to be a very good friend of mine. We moved apart, didn't have a falling out or anything, but just kind of don't hang out as much. This person is amazing. Love him to death. Was the first, I remember one of the first arguments I ever got into when I started talking about politics online. I put up a thing about trans people, and this woman was attacking me on this article I had written. And my trans friend came on and said, "Don't pretend that you speak for the trans community because you don't and you have no idea what you're talking about." Because that's what this problem is. People pretending that they understand a community that they don't belong to. A lot of your trans activists are not trans people. And a lot of your trans people who are activists don't speak for the rest of the community because the community doesn't all share the same beliefs and ideas. This push for gender inclusive language is a Twitter thing. This is just a Twitter thing that is now being brought to real life. You're seeing companies in healthcare facilities embrace this kind of language that no one likes. The amount of people who think that a term like black birthing people should replace the word woman or mother is a fraction of a percentage. They are not real people who believe this. Even your crazy left-wing progressives, for the most part, do not want this kind of language to pollute our language, the English language. It just sounds ugly. It sounds like an ugly phrase, and there's nothing wrong with the word mother. Trans people, they just want to be women. They're not offended by the word woman, and if you find me a trans person who's transitioned male to female and is offended by the word woman or mother when applied in this term, you've just found me a crazy person. That's what you found. You haven't found a person who's using a rational sense of their brain at all. So I don't want to hear it. It's just nobody likes this language. And here's another fact. I don't know if you knew this. Trans people, they don't have babies. They don't. The amount of women, for example, the uterus carriers who have transitioned to male and had a child after they transition is almost non-existent. You're talking, I'm sure I could count them on one hand. It does not happen. There are people who are pregnant and then transition before they realize they're pregnant and then say, oh, I'm a man now, and then have a baby. That's happened a handful of times in the history of the country. It doesn't happen all the time. It's not such a common problem. What you're trying to do is change the entire language to this ugly, gender-inclusive language, like phrases like black birthing people. That's an ugly phrase. The word mother sounds a lot nicer. You're trying to do that for two people, for a handful of people, who, again, probably are not offended by the word mother. And if they are, then all you've done is find me a person who's not rational. You haven't found me a case where I should have to examine my whole entire life and make sure that I never use a word that could possibly offend somebody. If you're offended by language, if you're offended by words, if you're offended by the word mother, grow up. Grow up. You're a child. To be offended by the word mother as though it's alienating to your lived experience, you're a child. Grow up. That's my answer to that. It is not reasonable to expect the entire world to redefine the word mother, to use terms like birthing people and uterus carrier. You're a child, grow up. Bush, here's another example of Cori Bush. In this same story, in the same testimony she gave this week, she said that a doctor told her during her second pregnancy that her fetus was going to abort, that she shouldn't worry about it. She could get pregnant again because that's what you people do. That was her quote. She said that the doctor told her she can get pregnant again because that's what you people do. Let me say this unequivocally. That didn't happen. I don't believe a doctor ever told her that. I think she is lying. And I will say that because I live in the city of St. Louis. She is claiming that she went to a St. Louis City hospital, which would mean the majority of the patients who go there are black, and a doctor told her, made such a racist statement to her as, that's what you people do. You get pregnant. She's saying that a doctor told her that in a St. Louis City hospital. And we're supposed to believe that Cori Bush is the kind of person who didn't run that up the chain, that she didn't make a complaint of this, that doctor wasn't fired or investigated. Does anyone believe that Cori Bush is the kind of person who would sit there and let someone say something racist and not throw a fit about it? Again, if somebody said something racist to her, she absolutely should have. She should have reported him. Did it happen? Do we believe that a doctor in a St. Louis City hospital is walking around making casual racist phrases to patients with impunity? That there's a racist walking around in a white coat here at either Barnes or SLU? Anyone believe that that's true? I'm sure that there are people who go, oh, of course it's true. They're all racist. But, any real sane people out there believe that's true? That there's a doctor walking around a city hospital saying casually racist things to patients. And that guy just feels so comfortable doing that no one's ever called him out on it. No, it didn't happen. Don't believe her. Think she's lying. Can't say any more than that. And because this Cori Bush's testimony started this controversy because people were pointing out the fact that black birthing people is a ridiculous phrase. She got on Twitter and she said, quote, "I testified in front of Congress about nearly losing both of my children during childbirth because doctors didn't believe my pain. Republicans got more upset about me using gender-inclusive language in my testimony than my babies nearly dying. Racism and transphobia in America," end quote. Anyone who doesn't like Cori Bush is a racist, according to Cori Bush. Anyone who points out that the term black birthing people is a stupid phrase is a transphobe, according to Cori Bush. I'm not transphobic. I don't care. If you want to transition from male to female, female to male, I'm more than happy to call you ma'am, more than happy to call you sir. Doesn't bother me at all. Do not care what you choose to do with your personal life. Have no problem with this. None whatsoever. The phrase black birthing people is idiotic. It's not transphobic to say that. It is pointing out what should be an obvious fact to anyone with a brain between their two ears. But apparently, and if you don't like Cori Bush, it can only be because she's a prominent woman of color and you're a racist. I don't know. Let's see. Can I get this camera to show that? See that picture? For those of you on the podcast, sorry, you're not going to be able to see this. I don't know if anyone can see this picture in the top. What would it be? I guess on the top right of your screen. That picture, that painting up in the top right, that's a painting of my personal hero, given to me by a good friend. My personal hero is Ayan Hirsi Ali. She happens to be a black woman. Now, that shouldn't matter, but the idea that I don't like black women, that's ridiculous. That's insane. The idea that I'm a racist because I do not like Cori Bush or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is ridiculous. Some of my personal heroes are black. I don't happen to like these people who are black. That doesn't mean I do not like black people. But Cori Bush will accuse everyone who criticizes her of being a racist. And you watch. If she watched this video, that's without a doubt that's what she'd say. She would absolutely say, well, you're only doing that because you're a racist. Okay, whatever. Let me impart upon you a little piece of wisdom that I have learned throughout my course in life. I learned long ago to never listen to somebody with a trashy chest tattoo. And if you follow that, they clearly don't make good life choices. And if you follow that rule, you can also just ignore Cori Bush like I do. Bad life choices, not a very bright person, in my opinion. And I don't believe her when she says things. She's just making up stories about racism. You know, she got punched by a cop in Ferguson and, wound up managed to not get arrested in that interaction. Okay. Maybe. I don't know. Who knows? We're going to move on. We're going to move on from Cori Bush for just a moment here. And I want to just real briefly, I want to talk about this actual topic that they were discussing in Congress. Now, there is a disparity. When you look at maternal health outcomes, there's a disparity between white and black in the United States. If you are black, you are 3 times more likely to die in childbirth than you are if you are white. I think I may have discussed this on the podcast before. I know I've talked about it with people before, but I don't know if I've ever discussed it on the podcast before. There are people like Cori Bush who will say racism. And here's what I'll say. It is possible that racism plays a part in that disparity, but I do not think the data is there to back up the fact that it is the primary or even secondary or tertiary driver of that. There's a difference, a tremendous difference in rates and conditions such as heart disease, diabetes, and hypertension in the white and the black communities. Those conditions, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, are primary drivers of complications during pregnancy. So when you are more likely to have one of those conditions and get pregnant, you are more likely to have a complication. This is not racism. It's not racism that's causing this. So there may be times when racism plays a part. I've seen some studies that suggest, for example, that black women are less likely to be administered pain meds than their white counterparts. Now, I thought there were some issues with that study, but overall, again, that would appear to have some sort of racial motivation. But in this case, in the case of maternal health outcomes, I don't know how you could point to racism. If you're more likely to have diabetes and hypertension, which is more likely to cause preeclampsia and then eclampsia, for example, how is that, having high blood pressure and being more likely to have preeclampsia, how is that racist? And is it, I don't understand the argument here, maybe, or maybe someone could explain that to me, because I'm sure the way that they tie it back to racism is they'll tie it back to things like food deserts in the black community, or lack of care prenatal, or even before prenatal, prenatal. They'll say there's a lack of care in the black community, which causes higher rates of hypertension, which is the result of racism. But that's not what they actually mean when they're saying this. What they mean is racism being ignored is the primary driver of this. And then when you point out that it's not, then they got to backfill it by saying, well, racism is responsible for all of these things in the black community. Higher rates of hypertension in the black community is the result of racism, because slaves ate a diet of blah, 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 and that's trickled down through this, and now the black diet is worse than the white diet, and there's hypertension. Ridiculous. I mean, people make life choices, and there is a genetic component to hypertension and heart disease. So that you can't blame genetics or racism being genetics being the result of racism. It's hard to do. It's a hard case to make. Anyway, I don't really want to get into that topic. I just wanted to point out that the entire reason that this controversy started, the entire testimony, was based on a false premise that Cori Bush is out there propagating, because that's what they do. She's a grifter. She is an activist who is just up there to push the narrative that America is a racist country when it isn't. It is the least racist, multi-ethnic country that has ever existed, ever, period, full stop. Anyway, we're going to leave it there today. I want to wish everyone a happy Mother's Day. Make sure that you have got your mom something nice. Give her a phone call. Spend some time with her. Do something. I don't know if you've ever seen what 10 centimeters of dilation looks like, but that woman deserves a present. So go ahead and get her one. I'm going to leave it there. I'm Tyler Chrestman. Hope you guys enjoyed the episode, and I will catch you next time.